global survey of nearly 1,500 enterprise IT leaders, 96% say that they plan to execute and expand their use of AI agents over the next 12 months, aiming for half or more of a significant organization-wide adoption. My name is Paul Nashawaty. I'm the practice lead of application development and modernization at theCUBE Research. And I'm joined today by James. James, how you doing?
Good, thanks for having me.
Yeah, great to have you on. You want to tell the audience a little bit about yourself and Amplitude?
Sure. So I work at Amplitude. We are a digital analytics company. So basically, we help companies with a digital presence, which is every company, whether it's a website, product, mobile app, understand how their visitors and users are engaged with their products, and then ultimately, optimize those experiences so they have a better experience. And then we've also transitioned from being sort of like an insights-focused platform to being one that lets you take action directly. Whether that's influence user behavior in the product or do an experiment, things like that. I joined Amplitude rather unconventionally. I was the founder of a company called Command AI. We were building user assistance software, and Amplitude acquired us to kind of round out that action side of the capability set.
Oh, well, that's very cool. I mean, that's very cool to be kind of bringing together in a larger kind of a direction.
Right.
I think that kind of aligns to what we're talking about here, right? With AI agents really moving from hype to really hard reality, it's really shaping how companies are building and scaling and consuming software, right? So a few examples to highlight is shift clearly towards Amplitude is when you're looking at things as going all in on agents and the adoption of expanding from isolated tests to organization-wide usage, it really is done at a remarkable speed now, right? I mean, before you were able to kind of do things and work through it, but like there's a couple of things that we have to think about. The organizations need to overcome operationalizing AI and real-time workflows, overcome resistance and such, and build that trust across the teams. But at the same time, there's a broader industry narrative that AI will kill SaaS, right? Which really kind of misses the mark, right? But rather than replacing software, agents are really redefining how the experience of working together, unlocking new ways to deliver value, and really starting to challenge whether SaaS will survive is kind of a big kind of focus here. But how teams can balance startup style vision with the rigor of enterprise execution. So James, I'm really excited to have you on here because there's a lot that's happening with these questions and where the industry is going. As the head of AI Amplitude, it really kind of really drives the point of like these conversations that we're seeing in the industry and where the market's going. It's a big kind of focal point right now for organizations. What are your thoughts?
Totally. I think what's remarkable is you shared a stat earlier that was like 90% or something of organizations want to use AI agents in a big way by the end of the year. I haven't been in technology like that long, but I've never seen like such conviction that a relatively like unproven technology is going to make such an impact. I think part of that is just like the definition of AI agents is kind of vague. It's like, oh, AI that does things for you. It's like, yeah, who wouldn't want that? But I think the where kind of companies or customers are like putting money where their mouth is there's a huge appetite to experiment with these pretty, young, often immature products. And just by way of example, we announced our agentic product, Amplitude Agents, back in June. At the time, it felt like we were kind of late. I think, we ended up being, on the earlier side. And this was like a research preview. It's very unlike our traditional product lifecycle where it's like beta, GA, you march from relatively alpha to something that's really polished. We had like 10x the amount of interest in participating in that research preview than we ever had for like any traditional beta product. And that's been awesome because it's been, made it much easier to develop those products alongside our customers. So it's honestly like a procurement thing. Like people are just so excited to try this stuff out. And I think that's kind of enabling a lot of these companies to iterate really quickly.
Yeah, I mean, I agree, but like there's a lot going on. We see that there's a lot of usage of AI in production workloads, right? We see in our own research that there's 500 to 1,000 new applications being created over the next 2 years that are driven by AI workloads at the edge locations alone, right? So there's like a lot happening just on with AI. But what drives companies like yours, but other companies in general, is really to kind of go all in on AI agents. And why is there such a big shift from starting with a small isolated experiment to organization-wide usage? Like, why is that such a drastic change with this kind of movement around AI agents?
I would frame it like this. I would, I guess, sort of reconceptualize the question to like, should a company go all in? And I think there's a couple criteria that, we think about and thought about as to why we wanted to make such a big bet here. One is we have interesting data. So like we have all this product behavioral data that our customers put in Amplitude for the purpose of analyzing it and using it. So that gives us an interesting, basis to work with. If you're quote unquote like just application software without sort of interesting data set, maybe fewer opportunities. The other thing is Amplitude, it's like I think 13 years or something old, has always been constrained by this fundamental law of software, which is like you have to spend time in the software to get value from it. And we see like a massive spectrum of how much time people spend in the software. And it's a consistent observation that there is like a small group, and this is probably true to a certain extent of most software companies, but there's a small group of users who, for whatever reason, spend a lot of time in the tool and get like so much value out of it. It's hard for us to dramatically increase the size of that like power user base because people, you only have so many hours in the work week. And so for us to, argue that you should spend more time in Amplitude to, chase down more trends, it's hard because like we have to eat into something else you're presumably doing, right? The cool thing about agents for us is we can shift from a model that relies on you being in the software to get value to actually pushing you. I think this is the key thing with agents. It's the background push. So instead of you maybe getting an anomaly alert and then going into a chart and like doing some filters and correlations and stuff, tracking down the issue, coming up with an experiment to run to take advantage of whatever you're seeing. Like we can do 95% of the work for you. It's not autonomous. There's this whole interesting talk of like, do AI agents have to be autonomous to create value? In our view, like if you define autonomy as taking a user-facing action without human approval, like we're taking the approach of we think human approval is fine because we're doing 95% of the work to identify an issue, do some automated analysis to figure out why it's going on, and suggest an action you can take, whether that's shipping a guide to your users, or like I said before, doing an experiment or shipping a bug fix or something. And so we're able to sort of relieve the fundamental constraint of our business, which is time spent in the software. And so I think if those two things are true, like you have interesting data and you're constrained by people spending time in your software, like great set of initial conditions to go all in on an agentic product.
Yeah, you said a lot in that last section there, and I think that there's a couple of things I want to touch on. One is the operational reality, right? Like there's a lot of new approaches that organizations are looking at right now because they're thinking about it in the context. Well, let's be real. I mean, AI agents and MCP serves A2A. This is all relatively new, 6 months, 9 months old, right? It's not that old. So there's a lot of dynamic shifts that are happening, and there's also a lot of skepticism that says, is this going to be what we do in the next 6 months? Or are we going to do this for the next 9 months? So like what, in your opinion, based on taking that information, that taking the work, I guess the lift off the shoulders, right? Which, by the way, is something that I hear quite frequently is complexity and skill gap issue is a major challenge for many organizations. And if you're taking that lift off the shoulders of people, that helps. But what are the most overlooked steps actually for operationalizing AI agents into real workflows, especially when you're hit with this, well, this isn't going to be used in the next 6 months, or this is going to be. So what are those things that you kind of overcome?
Yeah, I'd say the first step for us was just like building team consensus that we wanted to go big here. I think there's this weird disconnect where we talked about it earlier, where like everyone is so convinced that this stuff is going to make a huge difference everywhere. But then if you look at like actually where it's making a difference today, like I see basically 3 markets where like extreme amounts of value are actually being created by AI. One is customer support. One is software engineering, like coding assistants. And then an emerging third, like in the last 2 months, is like vibe coding, prototyping software. I would say outside of that, maybe there's some vertical use cases that I'm missing. Of course, there's like the B2C, ChatGPT, therapists, all that stuff. But I think that's kind of it. But there's this conviction that it's going to matter. And so I think a lot of companies, ourselves included, like when I joined, when we were acquired, I didn't start kind of leading cross-platform AI at Amplitude for a few months because, we had to like integrate our company and products and stuff like that. But the status, organizational like posture towards AI was sort of like wait and see. Like I think a lot of companies didn't want to be perceived as like overhyping something that was sort of flimsy. And so there was this weird dichotomy where you were either like really early or you were in this like, well, we don't want to embarrass ourselves by going all in. And I would say Amplitude was in that category. Like we had some AI capabilities actually pretty early. We had a natural language interface called Ask Amplitude. I think originally using GPT-4. And it got solid usage, but like not transformative. And so I think the company was sort of waiting for the moment to believe that's, maybe it was waiting for a competitor to do something interesting with AI. And we ended up deciding for those reasons I laid out that like there was enough here to be aggressive. And the other thing on that is I think customers are willing to they understand that these solutions are like evolving at the base rate of the fundamental like foundation models, as that's to say really quickly. And so customers are willing to give you some slack if like your first thing's like not super baked. And so that was the first step for us. Then you have to get customers interested in using it. That's like not really the hard part. And then the last thing I'd say, evaluating quality of AI products, very different than evaluating quality of SaaS. You got to do evals. Evals is like a very different muscle for a lot of companies. This is something that's near and dear to our heart because we help companies evaluate the quality of their software products. So if you're doing like a back and forth, it's really hard to evaluate natural language interactions without having a set of evals which specify like what good looks like across a bunch of your scenarios. And that's just really good product managers have been doing that for a while, but you haven't really needed to do it in a classic GUI environment. And now it's sort of like a new table stakes skill. So I'd say that has been, one of the things recently that we've been trying to upskill our whole product team on.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. I mean, on one hand, you have organizations that are like, look, I don't know, I don't want to invest, I don't want to put a lot of time and effort into something that's not going to be around. And on the other hand, if they don't kind of get in front of these pieces of these things, that these new AI kind of initiatives, they're going to be at a competitive disadvantage, right? When we see in our research that 25% of the IT budget is spent or allocated for AI initiatives. What that means is still questionable for a lot of organizations. They don't even know what AI initiatives really mean. It's like, as long as you put AI in front of the product, then I guess that's an AI initiative to them, right? And that's one perspective. Another perspective that you touched on, which I think is very interesting, again, tied back to our research, is the fact that the release of software is happening much faster at many different levels, right? And when you look at the release of software, we're seeing that 24% of organizations want to release code on an hourly basis, right? And that's a big challenge for many organizations. And if you're not using AI or automation to do that, it's almost impossible to release code that quickly. The other thing that you touched on is because AI allows for the generalist to do more of the work that a specialist was doing in the past, you have to really rely on things like governance, regulations, and controls that are pushed out across the organization. So if you have citizen developers or lines of businesses creating applications, you have to, you really have to have those governance and controls in place. So that goes to this next bullet point that I want to kind of talk through, which is the trust and proof points, right? When we look at how you build trust that's needed for AI agents really to be relied on across those lines of businesses or the professional developers, accessing new systems of engagement and existing systems of record. Yeah. How do you keep those things in place? You mentioned test environments and like trying things first. Is that the way to do it, or is there other ways to get it there?
I think people overcomplicate this, to be honest. I think it's really important to distinguish between autonomous agents, fully autonomous. There's always degrees of autonomy, right? Like what I laid out before for our agents do. Our agents can investigate hypotheses in the background, respond to changes in data, and suggest actions to take on the basis of data. They do not take action autonomously. We believe there's a future in which they totally do that, and you can run more experiments because you don't have to have a human, clicking approve. But frankly, compared to like the pre-AI workflow, clicking approve is like way easier. And the nice thing about it is you can inspect the work. It's human in the loop. Like you don't have to trust that the AI is not going to do something embarrassing because you can inspect the output before it ships. So I would say the reason I say people overcomplicate this is I think the way like we've seen, the way we've been building trust with these products is very similar to how you'd build trust with a regular software product that has like a push capability. I always use anomaly detection as the kind of pre-AI template for this. So anomaly detection, you set up some rules. You say, these are the metrics I care about. Maybe it's like visits to my page and clicks of checkout if you're an e-commerce business. And if there's meaningful deviation, and you define what meaningful is from the kind of baseline, I want to get pinged. What typically happens is people like sort of don't know exactly how sensitive to make those error boundaries or those kind of anomaly boundaries. And then you get pinged way too often. Maybe it's email, maybe it's getting sent to a Slack channel. What do? You unsubscribe or you mute the channel because it's like not providing value to you. We have exactly the same problem challenge with proactive in the background agents. Whereas if they're always pinging you with stuff that's not important or wrong, you're just going to turn it off because it's annoying. That's the difference with an autonomous agent and not is you have to do some work. And if it's too chatty, then you're going to turn it off. So we basically view it the same way we view anomaly, which is we just got to strike the balance of pinging you enough. We obviously don't want to ping you like once a month because that probably is underselling the capability set. And then we get feedback. But the other thing I would say is it's different to anomaly detection in that we frame these for our customers as like hiring a specialist for a job. Like day one, they need to show some promise, but they don't need to be like 100% perfect at the job because there's an expectation that as you give them feedback, they will get better over time. Obviously, it would be awesome if we could show up day one and just know everything. But there's a lot of business context that doesn't exist in Amplitude that's needed to help us understand like how can an agent that's monitoring the checkout page like do its job most effectively. And so I think also try to build the expectation with customers that like the feedback you give is going to make this way better over the training period of the first few weeks. And so far we've seen customers, I think they understand that these AI products require some amount of, training. It's not actually training, but some amount of feedback to get better. And that's been a huge part of us building trust with our customers is building the expectation that they need to give feedback and then showing them that the feedback they give actually influences the capabilities of the agents.
Yeah, that goes back to the kind of the innovation discussion of like you kind of want to continuously evolve, continuously iterate, continuously innovate, whether you're a startup or an enterprise and you kind of move at that pace. But, I do want to kind of touch on the fact that there's this narrative out there that's kind of in a place where AI is going to kill SaaS, right? But is that really the case, or how are AI agents really kind of redefining how software is consumed rather than replacing it? Is that like the right question to ask there? Is
people talk about this all? People have been talking about this, I think, since like GPT-3. Like, there's been like a meme take out there that like all software is going to collapse into a natural language interface, whether it's like ChatGPT, Claude, or every app is going to have their own natural language interface. And I do think there's a lot of apps that will turn into that.
Yeah.
If you have a product that people rarely log into, and when they log in, they do something like really specific. Maybe that's simplified as a text interface. We now have the capability to generate UI. So, that blurs the boundary a bit. So maybe it's not getting rid of SaaS. Maybe it's more personalized SaaS. But I'll simplify the question into like our user interfaces that we've been using for the last like 30 years going away. I think some will go away. But I think the distinction I draw is like the way I think about internet use, software use is search, browse. Search, you're trying to do something very specific. Natural language is the pattern for that. And I think every app is going to have some natural language, text interface. That's near and dear to my heart because that was the premise of the company I started, Command AI. However, we also have this browse concept, which is that we don't exactly know what we want to do with the software. We want the software to show us what it's capable of. And I think we've learned that printing out like a huge list of like, here's the 30 things that my natural language software is capable of doing for you, like it's not as metaphorical, it's not as visual, like human, like colors, like shapes. And so I think we're always going to have software, especially for creative stuff. Like, can you imagine Photoshop but text. Like, yeah, there's some stuff you'd want to do with text, but it's always nice to have like this visual set of tools. And so I don't think all user interfaces are going away, but I think the sort of perfunctory user interfaces, like the standard, like tabs on the left, buttons on the top for really basic search style workflows. Yeah, I think those are probably.
Yeah, we're definitely going to iterate and innovate, right? I mean, there's no question. What we see today is going to be very different than what we see in the next 3 to 5 years, especially as fast as things are moving. James, we talked a lot on this episode here, around the kind of the current state and the future state of AI and where it's going and what are some of our predictions are going. Where would you recommend the audience, the viewers here that are watching, where would you recommend them go to learn more about what we're talking about?
Oh, check us out at Amplitude. We blast our AI stuff all over our homepage to show you how excited we are about it. So yeah, check it out.
No, super cool. I mean, James, it's been awesome having you on. I mean, the insights and the perspective is really, it's wild, because today we're thinking about what the future is looking at, but forward-thinking companies are hedging their bets and making sure that there's these opportunities ready and available for the next generation. So I really appreciate you joining me today, and a big thanks to all of you that have joined us and tuned in. We appreciate you being part of the AppDevANGLE community. But for now, that wraps up this episode, and we'll be back next Wednesday with another conversation diving into the tools, trends, and talents shaping the future of application development. So whether you're developing at the edge, building with AI, or modernizing your cloud stack, we've got you covered. Be sure to follow us on social. If you have any thoughts, questions, or just want to connect, you can always reach me at paulan@siliconangle.com. Until next time, stay curious and stay building.